Hello everyone, this is Cool Stuff by Cool People, hosted by me, Shahad. This is our first episode where we interview cool people that create really cool stuff that impact our Richmond community. We're going to mainly focus on art education for the first few episodes, which is a segue to our first guest here, Dr. Caitlin Black. She was one of my favorite professors in art education. It was a really great experience to have you as my professor, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. But you graduated from VCU, and you had your dissertation about, the title of it was Addressing the Perceived Impact of a Local Community Engaged Mural Project on Pre-Service Art Educators in Foundational Coursework. There's going to be a lot of people that don't know the art education lingo, so could you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So assessing the impact of a community engaged mural project on pre-service art educators is a mouthful. Basically, there's this awesome community engaged mural project here in Richmond called Mending Walls, which I know you're very familiar with.
Yes.
And I had used this in coursework with you all, but before I used it in your cohort in the fall of 2022, I also used it in fall 2021. And that's what this particular project focused on, was those students, the people that are studying to become future art educators, the impact of engaging with that project is what the study looked at, basically. So we're looking at community engaged murals in particular, which are different from just murals in general because they have that community engaged component, which basically means that community members are involved in the mural making process and also in kind of the decision making and what goes into the mural. So looking at that, we focused on a lot of different things, which I'm sure we'll get into, but hopefully that was an okay summary.
That was an amazing summary, thank you. And yeah, before we get into that, can you tell me a little bit about your education journey? How did you come to VCU to seek your PhD and graduate, which is really amazing. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
You recently graduated like a few weeks ago, right?
Yes, just two weeks ago. Yeah, very recent. So thank you.
Really proud
I think
of
this
you.
is like my first time hearing Dr. Caitlin Black as an intro, so that was exciting.
Yes, I am the first to do that.
You are. And when you asked me, I think we need to talk about first how honored I am to be the first guest on this podcast that I know is going to continue to be amazing, because one of the most wonderful things about my experience here at VCU has been getting to work with art education students like you, because I also learn from you as well. I'm still learning from you almost every time we talk. You once said to me that you have many layers, and we are still peeling back those layers. But yeah, so how I got to VCU, I'll go back to your question now. How I got to VCU, I was a public school art teacher for 8 years prior to coming to VCU. I did my undergraduate degree at James Madison University, which is also in Virginia, although I'm not from Virginia. I'm from New Jersey, the Philadelphia area, South Jersey. So I went to undergraduate, got my degree in studio art and art history with an emphasis in art education, got my teaching license. I finished mid-year in December, so I started working at the Philadelphia Museum of Art briefly. And then I took a full-time teaching job that following fall in 2012 in South Jersey, in Winslow Township, New Jersey. I taught elementary art in Winslow Township for 4 years, preschool to third grade. And then I was ready for a change, moved cross-country to San Diego, California, where I taught middle school and high school art for 4 years. And then once again decided I was maybe ready for a change and applied to PhD programs, VCU being one of them, and ultimately decided that VCU was where I would see myself. So 2020, in the middle of the global pandemic, a very strange time to move, and started the program. And then here we are, 2023, just graduated.
Amazing. Also, in your time, in your journeys of education, you came across the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, right?
Yes.
How was that?
So I think growing up, I was always very intrigued by the murals. Philadelphia has the most murals per square mile of any city in the United States, and so it's very visible. When you're in the city, you look around, you can see murals. Walking down the different blocks, there's different murals, and I always was fascinated by it as a child, going through the city. As a high school student, I remember going on a walking tour of the murals, and that was really cool and enjoyable. And as a teacher, I utilized it with the elementary school students to teach them about murals in the city and the mural arts program, and that was actually unknowingly at the time kind of what sparked my ideas for my dissertation. Was when we were on a bus ride crossing the bridge into Philadelphia, coming from New Jersey, and the students started screaming on the bus, and the teachers are immediately like, what's happening, what's wrong, what's going on? Everyone quick kind of turns around, and then they're like, Miss Black, the murals, just like pointing out the window because they're starting to see them when we were on a field trip to the art museum. And for me, that was such an impactful moment to see their excitement and joy of their learning coming to life. And I realized, this field trip started so much before we even stepped inside the museum, it started on the bus ride when they were seeing the murals. And I think the next year when I took the next group of students, it was something that I purposefully prepared them for, make sure you're looking out your windows because you're going to see murals that we studied, and kind of talking about the murals that they might see on our ride over. But the first year was what brought me to that realization, was the students themselves pointing that out.
Yeah. I read about that in your defense. In your dissertation, you also explore the difference between aesthetic murals or public art and mural art that is community engaged. One of them is harmful, isn't it?
So I think it's something that I actually came to the realization of in this process. I don't necessarily think I was thinking about that before I started really having some time to dive into the research of it. And I started thinking critically, and I have to thank Dr. Courtney Wolfgang, who was my dissertation chair, and she really initially pushed my thinking of, well, are all murals inherently positive and good? And when I was going into it, I was honestly thinking they were. I was like, I love murals. I've seen how it changes people's interactions with spaces and how students engage with murals. But then once you start diving deeper, you start thinking about, well, if it didn't involve the community that lives here, what is this doing? And is it actually potentially having harmful consequences, even though it's maybe changing the space or quote unquote beautifying the space? Is it actually propelling gentrification or displacement of communities that were there? Is it involving the communities? Is it representative of the communities that are living there? And then you start seeing the potential for harmful consequences when you're not taking the community that's living there into account.
It reminds me of when we went on that bus trip during our Education 310, and we went to Sankofa Community Orchard. The mural art there was strongly related to the community. And there's a lot of volunteers walking in and helping plant basically what becomes food eventually for people. This leads me to ask you about, how did you first take interest in Mending Walls when you came to Richmond?
Yeah, so I moved to Richmond in July 2020. So, coming off the murder of George Floyd, the end of May 2020, and the protests that had erupted nationwide, but specifically in Richmond, it was an interesting time because as I was arriving, the monuments were basically all removed with the exception of one, and one was actually physically coming down as I was moving in.
Yeah.
And then I started noticing these murals, which seemed like they were going, and I knew Richmond, I was told about, like, Richmond has a lot of murals and a great art scene, but these just had a different emotional quality and seemed like they were going up in, like, rapid pace very quickly. Like, I was literally walking by open paint cans or seeing artists painting at night. I remember the Children's Museum driving by the one night, and I was like, wow, they're out there, like, under the lights painting this beautiful mural. Like, what is this? And then found out about the Mending Walls project, and as I'm reading the description of the project to promote cross-cultural connections and empathy and understanding, I'm like, oh, this is, like, I couldn't have dreamed better words to what I felt about the power of art and murals. And so I went to a civic talk. I attended a civic talk, which at the time was on Zoom because it was still the pandemic, and heard some of the artists spoke with different community members of different backgrounds and races, and then heard Hamilton Glass, the creator and founder, speak at that civic talk. And then I sent him an email afterwards to let him know that I attended the civic talk and how much I admired the concept of Mending Walls and what their goals were and how great it was to see these murals as a new person to the community, and was just like, how do we get this into schools? Because I'm a former art teacher, or, you know, kind of current art teacher. I think always an art teacher, right? So yeah. I'm just like, how can we get this into schools? And he was already on. I didn't realize then, you know, what a like prestigious artist he was here in Richmond, and how well respected he was in the community, which, looking back, it makes total sense. How can you bring that many people together to do a project so quickly? 16 murals in like 16 weeks, basically. It's just so impressive. And collaborative murals at that. So looking back, I should have known, and I also should have known he had already done so many collaborations with schools, but he was just so open. He reached out to me, called me on the phone. We talked for about an hour. I realized he was also from the Philadelphia area, and we just immediately kind of connected on, let's stay in touch and figure out how to make this work from an educational standpoint, because that was already part of his plan.
Yeah, I remember meeting him on that bus trip that you set up, and it was like meeting a celebrity. I was like starstruck, and I was very excited to ask him all kinds of questions. But it was really nice hearing his perspective when we went and saw some of the murals. And he was talking about how the artists put together these murals and about the time during the protest and after the protest. Not a lot of people focus on the process behind the work. We only like see these murals. If I was someone who didn't study art education, I would just see them and I'm like, oh, I wonder what that's about. And then I would go about my day, you know? But if you get closer to some of these murals, you see like a QR code and you could listen to the podcast, which is really amazing that they thought of that and they put it there. Because listening and hearing about the process behind the work is really, really impactful.
Yeah, I think you don't have that a lot, you know. Yeah. I don't know that many mural projects that have, or I'm not aware of it, but it doesn't mean they're not there. And I do think it's interesting to think about in today's day and age. You know, we all have our phones. Oftentimes, even walking down the street, people have their headphones in or are looking at their phone. Like, we're addicted. And so, and I'm guilty of this too. But then it's like, are we truly taking in our surroundings and thinking about where we are and thinking about what we see? And even with the Mending Walls project, introducing it in art education classes, a lot of people have said that they had seen the murals maybe before, but hadn't really looked into anything about the project. And so it's like, here we are as artists, and this is actually our field and our interests, and we haven't even really looked that closely into these things because we're just so busy, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many things going on. Like, we're constantly inundated with texts and calls and information and Instagram. And so it's hard to process, kind of just like actually visually taking in your surroundings in a space. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah. What I like about Mending Walls and what they did was that they focused on the experiences of the community, and they said we need to talk. Like they put that signal everywhere, right? So they're saying we need to talk to everyday people. Every day, like we go about our days not noticing that sometimes we have our own prejudices. We need to also look closer into ourselves, and that's very uncomfortable. For many people, I think that's a normal human thing for someone to just be very uncomfortable with addressing their shortcomings. So I like that they put we need to talk everywhere. It's a wonderful thing to look at those murals and just wonder what are the experiences of people that are not similar to me, which makes me think of your research. That was a really good segue. I'm proud of myself.
It was a good segue.
Yeah. In your research, you addressed your positionality, and this is a term I didn't even know about. And I'm going to explain it to everyone because I don't know if everyone knows about it. I'm sure a lot of people know. I just didn't.
I didn't know about it
really
like that well before either. So
okay,
this is good to talk about.
Good. Okay. So positionality is basically when you only are aware of your own experiences. You don't know another person's experience. So that's what positionality is. Addressing it is being aware of your own limits and viewpoint. Did I explain it right?
Yeah, your own. You only know what you know of your experiences. So I really have only lived in this world as a white woman, and so that impacts how I experience the world, right? And so we all come to the world with our own positionality and experience, and that can be a variety of the intersectionality basically is like, we all have our own race, gender, sexual orientation, like all of these impact the way that we experience the world, socioeconomic status, citizenship, like all of these impact our life experiences, and we can only really speak from our own experiences.
Yeah. And in your research, you address it, and I was wondering, why is that important in your research, and why is it important to do that in your classroom as an art educator?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that I'm really grateful for the Mending Walls project is that it allowed me to start to realize that we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And like you said, when you're in those vulnerable situations, it's difficult. It's not easy. And especially if you're addressing your own shortcomings or biases that potentially you weren't even aware of, So as an educator, particularly working with students, many of whom have had very different experiences than me or come from different backgrounds than me, I need to acknowledge who I am and how I've experienced the world, and also let them know that I welcome their diverse perspectives and that we're all going to bring unique contributions to the classroom, because I think you need to feel respected as an individual in the classroom. You need to feel comfortable with who you are and who your unique perspectives that you bring. So I think by acknowledging who I am, I invite everyone else to bring their authentic selves to the classroom as well.
That's so fascinating because it's part of your research too. You mentioned in your research that one of the purposes of it was to learn from your students' experiences and their perspectives as they learn about Mending Walls. So not only did you study the perspectives of those students and how it impacted their art education journey, but you also focused on your own journey. And I see you always practicing that in your day-to-day life? You were just saying that earlier in the podcast. You were saying you have many layers, Shahad. And I think art education is a lifestyle. Being an art educator is something that it integrates itself to humanness, I think. I don't know. Is that correct?
No, I definitely think so.
Yeah.
I think there's something about imagination and creativity and possibility within the arts that hopefully invite space for us to be our authentic selves while also recognizing the value of collaboration and learning from others.
One of the things that I noticed you do regularly as a previous student of yours is that you disrupt the hierarchical dynamic between professor and student. My experience, and I'm sure a lot of people's experiences, usually the professor's opinion is above all else. But what you do, what I really like about your approach, and I think it's part of your pedagogy?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, you want to go into that word? Because that's another.
Oh, yeah, pedagogy. It's the way that you teach. It's not what you teach, right?
It's a combination of theory and practice. So you're pulling from the theory and putting it into practice, and the combination of both.
One of the things that fascinate me also about your dissertation is how you made this framework. I'm going to put it on the screen, but it's basically this framework, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So it says community-engaged murals, community-engaged pedagogy, and community-engaged teacher prep. And at the center of it is the perception of pre-service art educators. Why is it at the center of it?
Centering my former students' perspectives was part of the dissertation work, because I knew what the Mending Walls project, I knew how it influenced me. I was reflecting very actively on that. But I didn't know necessarily how it influenced the pre-service art educators I was working with, because we never had explicit conversations about it. I thought I had some ideas based on responses or their visual journal entries that they had done for class, or just observing like classroom conversations and being a part of it. But I didn't actually really know. So this project gave me an opportunity to talk with some former students in depth and really learn from them about their thoughts and viewpoints on the experience with engaging with the Mending Walls project.
Yeah. So one of the big things that I learned from your class was that I can really feel like I belong in the U.S., even with the negative aspects of it. Like when I first got here, I received a taste of American racism. And I wasn't aware of it. I was like, what does this person mean? When I was bummed out about that, I kind of spent a whole year in the U.S., my first year in art foundation, being like, okay, so I don't feel like I belong here. That's fine. I'll just endure it for a few more years and then leave. Then I decided to join art education, and your course was the first one I was introduced to. And knowing the impact you can have by talking about these things, and how Mending Walls utilizes mural work to have those conversations, it does leave an impact, and it does change people. If it changed me to that extent, it can change many other people. And that kind of clicked in my head, and I was like, okay, so what I can do to feel like I can belong here is be a good art educator and teach my kids, well, my students, I don't know, do teachers say my kids too?
They do. Yeah, they definitely do.
I haven't even started teaching yet, and I'm so ready.
You are ready.
So if I could teach my students to be aware and mindful and notice that people are talking about these things through art, and you can do that too. And your identity is so honorable and important that it can be included. And that leads me to one of the artists that you included in the curriculum, which was Celine, an MFA student. MFA, right?
MA.
Sorry.
Yes.
MA.
No.
I don't know these terms yet. So she introduced multilingual art education to us. And here's the thing. I always was ashamed of including my native language in my art here in the US. I thought it was the best decision for me to hide my identity so that people would perceive me as a human being, not as my race or my identity. But then when Celine introduced that, I was like, oh my gosh, I can include my language in beautiful ways. And it doesn't matter what people think of it. If Dr. Caitlin included this in our curriculum, then that means I get to embrace it and there's a place for me here. And I started including my native language in a lot of my work now because of that. So yeah, that's how you impacted me.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
I actually haven't, I don't think I've heard, I mean, I haven't heard you say that to me outright, that changed your approach to language in your artwork. And it's really powerful because I actually, even when I was packing, was putting in preserving your card where you wrote in Arabic my name on the back.
Yeah.
And you know, I just think it's so important to encourage that because I mean that's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
Not only are you doing a podcast in English right now, but you could immediately translate this podcast into Arabic. And how incredible is that? I can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, like you are just so advanced and have so much knowledge to share. So,
but like, remember when I gave you that card? You were like, oh, so you read this from right to left, not left to right. And I felt like that was really amazing because you already knew how to a little bit about Arabic, and having a teacher be aware of your culture and aware of small things about like tiny things, tiny information about who you are, I don't know, it just has its own impact. It has its place in my heart, I guess. Like I have to do that with my students too, if I don't know their culture very well.
And what I will say, I learned that from a former student because I had a student who spoke Arabic, moved when they were in 8th grade, started in my class in 9th grade, and taught me a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us as educators to always learn from our students. I mean, I know I have so much more to learn from you. I'm just very much getting those layers, you know. It's just the beginning, Shahad.
That is exciting. I'm excited to also find out more about your art education journey and your future endeavors. I'm excited for you. RISD is so cool. Maybe I'll apply for a master's there if I have the money.
Or get scholarships.
Or get a scholarship, you know. I love that we got off topic. I don't think we should go back to the questions, honestly. I should throw these.
No. You spend time.
I spent time on them. You're right. But so tell me a little bit about the takeaways from your research.
The takeaways.
The takeaways from your students and the takeaways for you.
Okay. So I think the themes that started to come out of it, let's see if I can recall them all. Community, social justice, incorporating local artists, public art, using public art in curriculum.
Accessibility of public art.
Yeah, accessibility of public art. Hopefully I got them all covered in that. But I just learned so much from my students and their takeaways, and I was honestly surprised by many of the things that they shared, even though I thought I had a pretty good idea going into it about things I might hear from them or what I might learn. I think I enjoyed every conversation because there was something from every conversation that made me think, wow, that is so interesting. And just their own unique experiences. And one thing that it made me think about a lot, Shahad, and this is kind of why we did the field trip in our class, was because of their feedback from the previous semester before I even started this research. They said, I wish we got to see more murals further from campus. And that was part of the reason I applied for that grant to go on the field trip with our class. I was like trying to grow from their input. And unfortunately, many of them had class at that time, and I invited them, but they couldn't really attend. So your class kind of got the benefits of their feedback and me growing from their feedback. But one thing I realized is that when we were in these moments where I wasn't quite sure if it was truly a great learning experience, like when we were standing at the murals, I knew I was gaining from it, but I wasn't quite sure, like, is this just a walk away from campus? And sometimes it was really hot and I felt bad, like, oh, people are probably like, could we just be in the classroom? But I felt like overwhelmingly the feedback, a lot of the powerful moments came in those moments outside of the classroom. And it just made me think that's why as educators it's important that we try to create experiences for students that involve leaving the walls of the classroom. Because those are the moments that you remember and are impactful. So if I could say, like, one main takeaway was how many people felt that they had moments of impact at some of the murals was really powerful for me to hear.
Yeah. And you said it was hot outside. We didn't mind it. We actually enjoyed it. Well, that was really, really impactful. The dissertation is amazing. You did such a great job on it.
Thank you.
It took so long, didn't it?
It did.
And a lot of hard work, because every single paragraph is so well written. I only read like one chapter, but like you back up everything you say, and it's so... I could never understand the work of PhD students.
You
so
could.
I can't give you enough credit, I think, because this is only my perceptions as an undergrad. But thank you for thinking I could.
No, you definitely can.
The impact of community engaged mural projects, it should be in every art education in school, because I saw the effects of it on me, and you saw the effects of it on your pre-service art educators. So imagine the impact of it on students who are still in their school years.
Yeah, I will be interested to see, particularly like you all having thought about it, if you apply these things in your future classrooms, like what that looks like. I think that will be fun to see what younger students think about engaging with those artworks. And I think I tried to do it when I was teaching, but didn't go as far as I would like to now. But we're always a work in progress. I'm definitely a work in progress.
You work really hard on like finding out more about these things, creating community everywhere you go. So Thanks. I trust that everything is going to go well for you at RISD.
Thank you.
I really do. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I guess we're wrapping up.
That sounds awesome. It was so cool to be here on this cool podcast. Thank you for having me as your first guest. It is a true honor. Very cool.
It's an honor to have you too. And I'm excited for our future guests here if anyone has any suggestions. And yeah, thank you so much. I was your host, Shahad, and this was Dr. Caitlin Black. Amazing. Where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Black Art.
And I'm going to leave it in the descriptions of everywhere I post this. I still don't know where. But yeah, thank you all. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.